The night was dressed in elegance. Lanterns hung from the low branches of ancient oaks, glowing like soft orbs of fire against the warm New Orleans sky. Their light spilled across the garden in shifting patterns, mingling with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the polished notes of a quartet playing somewhere near the veranda. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering silk gowns moved with practiced grace, drifting from one conversation to another as if the evening itself were a carefully rehearsed performance. It was more than a party. It was a show of wealth, of influence, of status, an occasion where every handshake carried hidden meaning, and every smile concealed a calculation. And yet, in the center of it all, it stood a man who didn't quite belong to this polished world. Ethan Cole. His name carried weight here, though not because of money or family lineage. Ethan was a veteran, a man who had spent years overseas, serving in conflicts most of these guests only read about in newspapers. He had come back with scars, some visible, most not, but also with a quiet dignity that people recognized instantly. Tonight, he wore a dark suit that felt more like borrowed armor than clothing. The fabric fit well enough, but it could not erase the military posture that straightened his shoulders or the sharpness in his gaze when he surveyed the crowd. To the guests, he was more than a soldier. He was a story, a symbol of sacrifice and resilience. That was why he was here tonight, as the guest of honor at this fundraising gala, invited by city officials who were eager to be seen beside a man of grit and integrity. People approached him with smiles, with compliments, with hollow gratitude that didn't always reach their eyes. Ethan accepted it all politely, though deep down he felt out of place. These people lived in a world of chandeliers and polished silver. His world had been dust, sweat, and gunfire, but not everyone in that garden looked at him with admiration. At the edge of the crowd, half hidden in the shadows cast by swaying lanterns, stood a man in a black coat. He was tall, with an expression that revealed nothing, and he didn't join the laughter or the toasts. He didn't even pretend. His attention was fixed on Ethan Cole, unwavering, almost predatory. He raised no glass, offered no greeting. Instead, he simply watched, calm, patient, like a hunter studying his mark. And then, far from the polished shoes and silk gowns, there was someone else who didn't belong. On the outskirts of the garden, crouched low behind a trimmed hedge, a boy no older than 12 hugged his knees to his chest. His name was Lucas. Barefoot, in worn clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame, he was a ghost to the world of the wealthy. Lucas hadn't come for the music or the elegance. He had come because he was curious, because he had never seen such light, such laughter, such abundance. The smell of roasted meats and sweet pastries pulled him closer, stronger than any warning his grandmother had ever whispered about staying away from places that weren't meant for boys like him. He had slipped through a gap in the iron fence when no one was looking, moving with the silent desperation of a child who had learned long ago how to avoid being noticed. Now, tucked into the shadows at the garden's edge, he watched the spectacle unfold. His wide eyes darted from one face to another, fascinated, bewildered, almost enchanted by the beauty and excess on display. But Lucas wasn't invisible, not to fate. His gaze wandered across the glowing scene, catching on the man at the center of attention, the tall veteran in the dark suit who shook hands with city leaders and smiled politely at strangers. Ethan Cole looked different from the others. His shoulders carried weight, his eyes a certain sadness. Lucas recognized it without knowing why, the way a child sometimes senses things that adults miss. And as he shifted his eyes again, Lucas noticed something else. Someone else. The man in the black coat. Lucas didn't know his name, didn't understand the hard stillness in his stare, but he saw what others didn't. He saw how the man never laughed, never clapped, never drifted from group to group. He saw how his eyes stayed locked on Ethan Cole like a shadow tethered to a flame. The boy shivered, though the night was warm. He hugged his knees tighter, pressing himself deeper into the hedge, as if hiding could protect him from a chill that had nothing to do with the air. The garden remained alive with music and chatter, oblivious to the threads already weaving between these three figures: the honored soldier, the silent predator, and the boy no one noticed. Their paths hadn't crossed yet, not directly, but destiny was patient, and in the soft glow of the lanterns, beneath the timeless oaks of New Orleans, a story was about to begin, a story of danger, of courage, and of a voice so small it almost went unheard, but one that would matter more than all the rest. The night moved with its own rhythm. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between guests like dancers in a carefully choreographed play. Silver trays balanced easily on their palms. Wine glasses shimmered beneath the lantern light, filled with ruby reds and pale golds. Every detail of the evening seemed polished, perfect on the surface, but beneath that surface, shadows stirred, at the edge of the crowd. The man in the black coat shifted his position, closer now. His movements were smooth, unhurried but deliberate. He blended well enough into the background, unnoticed by those too busy with conversation and laughter, yet his eyes never left Ethan Cole. He waited for his moment. Ethan, oblivious to the watchful gaze, stood near a long table draped in white linen, where rows of crystal glasses gleamed. Guests approached him with admiration, some clapping him on the back, others eager for a word, a handshake, a photograph. Ethan gave them polite smiles, though his mind drifted elsewhere. The soldier in him, the part that had lived too long in hostile terrain, still found crowded places suffocating. Every face felt like a mask, every laugh rehearsed. He reached for a drink, and that was when the man in black acted. His hand moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this gesture 100 times. From the inner pocket of his coat, he produced a small vial, no bigger than a finger, filled with liquid as clear as water. With the casual ease of someone adjusting a cup, he uncorked it and tilted it over a glass of red wine that had been set aside for Ethan. A few drops fell silently into the drink, colorless, invisible, lethal. The cork clicked back into place. The vial disappeared into his coat. No one turned their head. No one noticed. No one, except for a boy. From his hiding place near the hedge, Lucas had been watching everything. At first, he had followed the black-coated man with the innocent curiosity of a child trying to make sense of unfamiliar faces. But when the man pulled out the vial, Lucas's body went rigid, his wide eyes locked on the tiny notion of the drops falling into the glass. He knew, in a way children sometimes just know, that wasn't water, that wasn't anything good. Lucas's stomach knotted. His heart began to thump so hard he could hear it in his ears. He wanted to scream, to shout out what he had seen, but his throat closed tight. Who would believe him? A barefoot boy who didn't even belong here. He imagined it stepping into the glow of the lanterns, tugging at the sleeve of some important man in a suit, pointing a trembling finger at a stranger. They would laugh at him, push him away, maybe worse. They might think he was the troublemaker, that he had sneaked in to cause mischief. His grandmother's voice whispered in his memory, "Lucas, don't meddle in things that aren't yours. Keep your head down, stay invisible." Invisible. That was what he had always been, to neighbors, to shopkeepers, to teachers who looked past him when he sat at the back of the class. He had mastered the art of silence, of not being noticed. It was safer that way. But now, what he had seen pressed heavy against his chest, invisible or not, he was the only one who knew. Back at the drinks table, Ethan reached for the poisoned glass. He had no reason to suspect a thing. Around him, laughter swelled as a man in a tuxedo told a joke loud enough to send ripples of amusement through the crowd. Music swirled. A breeze rustled the oaks. The night, for everyone else, was untouched by danger. For Lucas, every second stretched like a lifetime. He dug his toes into the grass, torn between fear and urgency. His eyes darted around the garden. No one else had seen. No one else was watching the man in black, who now drifted back into the crowd. His task completed, his expression unreadable. Lucas gripped the hedge, his nails biting into the wood. His breath came shallow, uneven. He wanted to run, to escape the weight of what he had witnessed. But his gaze snapped back to Ethan, the man with kind, tired eyes who had smiled politely at strangers all the evening, the man who was about to lift that glass to his lips. Lucas's legs trembled. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it wouldn't go down. The thought hammered in his head, relentless. If you don't speak, he will die. And yet another thought whispered back, cruel and familiar. But no one will believe you. You're just a kid, just a nobody. He hugged himself tighter, rocking slightly where he crouched. The sounds of the party blurred around him. His entire world narrowed to a single moment, a single choice. The glass sat on the table, gleaming under the lantern light. Ethan's hand hovered near it. Lucas's breath hitched. What do I do? The toast was about to begin. Crystal glasses clinked beneath the glow of lanterns strung high above the courtyard. The band slowed their tempo, easing into something ceremonial. All eyes turned toward Ethan Cole, who stood near the center of the floor, surrounded by a semicircle of smiling faces. He had been pulled into this ritual as if the crowd believed their own joy could be poured into him. The host, a broad man with a waxed mustache and a silver chain on his waistcoat, raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice thick with southern warmth. "Tonight we welcome back a son of this city, a man who gave years of his life to serve his country, Ethan Cole." Applause thundered through the night. Ethan, tall and weathered, offered a small nod, his posture stiff as though honor still sat heavy on his shoulders. His gray-blue eyes scanned the crowd, searching for something beyond their polished smiles, On the edge of the courtyard, Lucas froze in his hiding spot near a row of potted palms. His bare feet pressed against cool stone as his heart pounded against his ribs. He had seen it clear as day. The man in the black coat. The hand that slipped casually toward Ethan's glass. The quick swirl of fingers. A drop of liquid disappearing into the amber wine. No one else had noticed. Lucas's throat tightened. His first instinct had been to run, to bolt out of the courtyard and vanish into the streets of New Orleans where he belonged. He had learned early in life that survival meant staying unseen. The moment grown-ups noticed him, the moment he dared to speak up, he was dismissed or worse. He still remembered the baker on Charles Avenue. Lucas had tried to warn him once about a thief lurking outside. The man had laughed, tossed him a crust of stale bread, and told him to stop making up stories. Hours later, the baker's till was empty, and Lucas received a beating for loitering. He remembered the priest who had promised him shelter for the night, only to slam the church doors shut when Lucas admitted he had no family. Adults didn't listen, not to boys like him, and yet, across the courtyard, Ethan Cole raised the poisoned glass. His hand was steady, but Lucas felt the weight of time pressing down on every second, the invisible line drawing closer to disaster. Lucas's lips parted, but no sound came out. He thought of how the guests would react if he charged into their world now, the barefoot street rat disrupting their perfect evening. They'd laugh at him. They'd drag him out. Maybe Ethan would already be dead by then. A war raged inside his chest, fear and courage, tangled like two dogs in a fight. One snarled that he was nothing, just a kid who would never be believed. The other whispered that staying silent would make him a coward, the kind who carried guilt for the rest of his life. Ethan lifted the glass higher. Guests leaned in. The band dropped to a hush. Lucas's pulse thundered in his ears. He pictured Ethan collapsing, the courtyard breaking into chaos, that black-coated man slipping away into the night while nobody ever knew the truth. And then he saw something unexpected. Ethan's hand trembled just barely, but enough for Lucas to notice. His eyes, those soldiers' eyes, flicked across the crowd with the same suspicion a man carries from the battlefield into peacetime. For a fleeting moment, Ethan looked like someone waiting for an ambush. Lucas gritted his teeth. Maybe Ethan didn't know it yet, but danger was here, and Lucas was the only one who could stop it. His chest heaved. He took a step forward from the shadows, the lantern light kissing his dirt-streaked face. But then he froze again. What if he was wrong? What if the man in the black coat hadn't dropped poison at all? What if it was nothing, just wine catching the light? If Lucas was mistaken, if he shouted now, he would ruin everything. They'd drag him out of there. They'd laugh. He'd be beaten, maybe arrested. The doubts pressed heavy on his young shoulders. His toes curled against the stone tiles. He thought of his mother, blurry in memory now, but always whispering the same words when he was little. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid, Lucas. It means you're afraid and you choose to act anyway. His stomach nodded. The toast had begun. To Ethan Cole. The host boomed. To Ethan. The crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Ethan lifted his own higher, the poisoned rim brushing against his lips. Lucas sucked in a sharp breath. The moment stretched, suspended between silence and catastrophe. He could feel the weight of the choice: speak and risk everything, or stay silent and live with the memory of watching a man die. His jaw clenched, his fists balled. For once in his life he didn't care if they loved. The boy's voice tore from his throat, raw and desperate. Don't drink it. The words cracked through the courtyard like a stone shattering glass. Every head turned. The band stopped cold. The host froze with his smile half carved into his face. Ethan lowered his glass, eyes narrowing, searching for the source. And there, standing barefoot beneath the lantern glow, was Lucas, the forgotten child of the streets, trembling but unbroken, staring straight at the man he had just dared to save. The courtyard fell into stunned silence, and somewhere, at the far end of the crowd, the man in the black coat began to move. The glass hovered inches from Ethan's lips. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Lantern light shimmered across crystal and silk gowns. 100 expectant eyes watched, eager for the clink and sip that would seal the toast. Ethan's shoulders were square, his jaw hard, but behind his soldier's calm, something inside him hesitated. Years of war had etched instincts too sharp to ignore, and right now those instincts whispered danger. Then it happened. Don't drink that. The cry ripped through the music, through the laughter, through the warm southern night. It was a boy's voice, high, desperate, raw. Gasps flared across the crowd as heads whipped toward the sound. Ethan blinked, stunned, the rim of the glass still brushing his lower lip. He lowered it half an inch, frowning, and before anyone could move, the boy broke free from the shadows. Lucas ran barefoot across the courtyard, skinny legs pumping, dirt-streaked face twisted with fear. He darted past startled guests, weaving through gowns and tuxedos, until he threw himself at Ethan with every ounce of strength in his small frame. The glass flew from Ethan's hand. Time slowed. It spun once, catching the glow of lanterns, a glittering jewel suspended in air. Then it crashed to the stone floor, exploding into shards. Wine splattered like blood across polished shoes, skirts, and marble tiles. But it wasn't just wine. A sharp, acrid smell cut through the air, faint but unmistakable to anyone who had ever handled poison. The liquid hissed where it landed, eating into the polish of the floor. A ripple of gasps tore through the crowd. For a heartbeat, the courtyard was silent, utterly, eerily silent. And then the night cracked wide open. "What in God's name?" someone shouted. "The boy, he's crazy." Another voice rang out. "No, look at the floor. Look at it." Ethan didn't move right away. His eyes locked on the shattered glass, on the dark liquid spreading like a shadow across the tiles. He had smelled things like that before in far-off villages, in back rooms where insurgents laced wells and rations. His instincts were screaming now, not whispering. This was no accident. His gaze flicked to the boy, who stood panting at his side, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror but defiance too. The boy had saved him. Around them, chaos erupted. Women shrieked, gathering skirts away from the liquid. Men cursed, pulling handkerchiefs to their noses as if the fumes alone could kill. Guests backed away in a wave, the semicircle breaking into confusion. The band stopped playing entirely, instruments clattering as they scrambled from the stage, and in that confusion Ethan's trained eyes swept the crowd. There at the far edge of the courtyard, a man in a black coat, shoulders rigid, face half hidden by the glow of lanterns. For a fraction of a second their eyes met, cold, calculating, no trace of surprise at what had just unfolded, only irritation. Then the man moved, not toward them, but away, slipping through the throng of panicked guests, using the rising tide of bodies to mask his retreat. Ethan's blood surged hot. He turned back to the boy. "What's your name, kid?" His voice was steady, calm, though adrenaline thrummed beneath it. Lucas swallowed hard. "Lucas, you saw him, didn't you?" Ethan asked. The boy nodded fiercely, his bare feet shifting against the tiles. "The man in the coat, he put something in your drink. I couldn't just watch." Ethan studied him. In those eyes, too old for his young face, he saw no trace of Elia, only fear, and something else, courage. The host of the party shoved through the crowd, his face flushed with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Who let this street rat in here? Guards, get him out at once." Two uniformed attendants rushed forward. Lucas shrank back, his moment of bravery already twisting into dread. He had been here before the instant when adults stopped listening, when they branded him a nuisance, a liar, a nothing. But this time was different. Ethan stepped in front of him, one hand raised like a shield. His voice carried the weight of command, the kind that cut through noise and demanded obedience. "Stand down," he ordered. The attendants froze, glancing at each other. The host sputtered. Caught off guard, Ethan turned, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd. "This boy just saved my life," he said. His voice was measured, but it struck like a hammer in the silence. "Someone tried to poison me. He saw it, he stopped it, and if any of you doubt it, look at the damn floor." Dozens of eyes dropped to the spreading stain, the acrid scent curling upward. Murmurs rippled, fear shifted into suspicion. Guests looked at one another, suddenly aware that danger had slipped into their midst. The host's mouth opened, then closed again. His confidence faltered. Meanwhile, at the edge of the courtyard, the black-coated man slipped through an archway and vanished into the night. Ethan's jaw tightened. His instincts screamed to pursue, to finish the fight before it could begin. But he glanced down at Lucas, the boy clutching the hem of his sleeve, shaking but standing tall. For now, the child mattered more. The night was broken, the illusion of safety shattered. The lanterns still glowed above, but their light seemed harsher now, throwing long shadows across the courtyard where whispers of betrayal clung to every corner. And at the center of it all stood Ethan Cole, the soldier returned home, and Lucas, the orphan who had dared to cry out against death itself. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives had just become bound together by poison, by courage, and by the cry that had torn through the night. The courtyard dissolved into pandemonium. Screams tore through the humid night as guests stumbled backward, silk gowns snagging on chairs, champagne flutes shattering underfoot. The glittering veneer of the party cracked wide open, revealing raw fear underneath. Music had stopped long ago, replaced by the shrill pitch of panic. Servants shouted over one another, some rushing to shield the host, others grabbing for towels as though cloth could soak up poison. The lanterns, once a symbol of elegance, now swung wildly in the breeze, casting frantic shadows across the scene. Every flicker of lights made the chaos look more unhinged, more dangerous. In the middle of it all, Ethan Cole stood still. His chest rose and fell with measured breaths, his instincts sharpening to the soldier's edge. He scanned the swirl of bodies, searching for the man in the black coat. There, just for a second, he saw him, a sharp silhouette slipping between panicked guests, moving low, quick, purposeful. The man didn't push or shout. He slid through the chaos like smoke, knowing exactly how to vanish. Ethan started forward, but something tugged at his sleeve. Wait, it was Lucas. The boy's small hand gripped him with surprising strength, eyes wide and desperate. In that instant, Ethan realized he had almost forgotten about him. The hesitation cost him. By the time Ethan shoved through the crowd, the man in black had already reached the garden archway. Lantern light caught the curve of his shoulder as he turned once, almost daring Ethan to follow. Then he disappeared into the darkness beyond. Ethan cursed under his breath. He pushed harder, but bodies pressed in from every side. Guests clung to him, crying questions, grabbing his arms, demanding answers. Their perfume choked the air. The man was gone. And then, sharp and bitter, his anger turned downward. He spun on Lucas. Still clutching his sleeve, his voice came out low, dangerous, vibrating with fury and adrenaline. What the hell were you thinking? Lucas froze. His bare feet sifted on the stone floor. His dirt-streaked face tilted up toward Ethan, eyes shining in the lantern light. He swallowed hard. I had to. I saw him. I saw what he did. Do you have any idea what you just did? Ethan snapped. You could have gotten yourself trampled. You could have. He stopped, jaw clenching. His words weren't just anger. They were fear, twisted sharp. Lucas pointed a trembling finger toward the archway. Him. The man in the coat. He's the one. He poisoned it. I swear. Ethan followed the line of his finger. But the archway gaped empty. Shadows. Nothing else. The boy's proof had evaporated. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to believe him. God help him. He already half did. The acrid smell from the shattered glass still stung his nose, and his gut told him Lucas was no liar. But belief alone wouldn't convince the mob of guests, wouldn't stop the suspicion already swelling like a tide around them. Where is he now, huh? Ethan demanded. His voice cracked harder than he meant. Show me. Point him out. Where's your proof? Lucas's hand trembled in the air. His finger fell slowly to his side. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The man was gone, and with him, the boy's fragile shield of credibility. All around, the whispers started. Who was that child? Where did he come from? An urchin off the street. He caused all this. Maybe he's the one behind it. A distraction, nothing more. The words buzzed like hornets, and Lucas shrank beneath their sting. His eyes darted between the faces staring down at him, faces twisted by suspicion and fear. The familiar weight of disbelief pressed hard against his chest. He had lived this moment before, in smaller ways, with teachers, with shopkeeper, with strangers who never listened, and now, here it was again. Only bigger, harsher, crueler. Ethan stepped closer, crouching slightly so he could look the boy in the eye. His voice softened, though the frustration still burned beneath it. Listen to me, kid. If you're lying, now's the time to come clean. If this is some stunt, I'm not lying. Lucas burst out, his small fists balled at his sides. I saw him. He had a little bottle. He put it in your glass. I'm telling the truth. I swear it. The courtyard quieted for a beat, the boy's desperate cry echoing against the stone walls. Ethan studied him, measuring every flicker in his eyes, every tremor in his voice. What he saw wasn't mischief. It was terror, and something else, conviction, raw and unshakable. But the crowd didn't see it. They only saw a dirty child in rags, claiming he'd stopped a murder no one else had witnessed. The host stormed forward, red-faced with fury. Enough of this circus. Get that boy out of here before he ruins us all. Two attendants lunged again, and Lucas flinched, ready to run. But Ethan rose to his full height, stepping into their path like a wall. His voice was a thunderclap. He stays with me. The attendants halted, unsure. The crowd murmured louder, fear and anger rippling in waves. Ethan didn't care. He had lived through firefights, through betrayals, through nights where a single choice meant life or death. He trusted his instincts, and his instincts told him the boy was right. The man in the black coat was real, the poison was real, and the danger was far from over. Ethan glanced once more toward the archway. Empty. Not. Then he looked down at Lucas, still shaking, still clutching at his sleeve like it was the only lifeline he had. "All right, kid," he said quietly, his anger tempered into resolve. "You stay close. You don't let go. We'll figure this out." And under the swaying lanterns of New Orleans, with fear thick in the air and shadows crawling just beyond the walls, Ethan Cole realized something unsettling. The boy's cry had shattered the night, but the real chaos was only just beginning. The courtyard was still vibrating with chaos when a commanding voice cut through the noise. "Stand aside. Let me through." Heads turned, guests shifted. Through the throng came a tall, silver-haired man in a crisp white dinner jacket. His presence carried authority, the kind that silences a room even without shouting. A thin gold chain glinted against his vest, and his stride was unhurried, deliberate. "Dr. Coldwell," someone whispered with relief. "He's here." Dr. Henry Coldwell was more than just a guest. He was one of New Orleans' most respected physicians, a man who had treated dignitaries, businessmen, even politicians. Tonight, he had been enjoying his wine like everyone else until panic turned the party into a battlefield. He stopped before the shattered glass, crouching low. The acrid stench still hung in the air, faint but unmistakable. Pulling a white handkerchief from his pocket, he dipped a corner into the dark puddle spreading across the stone floor. Slowly, he lifted it to his nose, inhaling just enough to test the scent. A shadow passed over his face. His jaw tightened. He stood, turning to the host, to the guests, to Ethan, to everyone. "This isn't wine," he said, his voice steady but cold. "It's poison, a highly concentrated alkaloid. Even a few drops could stop a man's heart in minutes." Gasps rippled like a wave across the courtyard. A woman shrieked. Someone dropped a glass, the shatter echoing like a gunshot. Ethan's stomach clenched. He stared at the stain, then at the boy beside him. If Lucas hadn't acted, if that desperate voice hadn't cut through the night, he'd be lying on the ground right now, convulsing, choking on his last breath. The thought landed heavy. Ethan Cole, who had survived deserts, ambushes, and firefights, had nearly been killed, not on foreign soil, but here, in his own city, at a party meant to welcome him home, by a glass of wine. And he would have been, if not for a boy nobody had wanted here. Ethan turned his gaze on Lucas. For the first time that night, his eyes softened. Lucas was trembling, his dirt-streaked face pale under the lanterns, his hands twisted together nervously, as if bracing for punishment. He looked up, expecting more anger, maybe even rejection. That's what always came after. But instead, Ethan's expression shifted first from suspicion, then to realization, and finally to something the boy had never seen aimed at him before: respect. "You saved my life," Ethan said quietly. Lucas blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. The host sputtered, his voice rising with indignation. "This is outrageous. Poison here. Impossible. The boy's story is nothing but a trick." Dr. Coldwell cut him off sharply. "There is nothing impossible about it. I've seen this compound before. Rare, expensive, and deadly. Whoever slipped it into that glass intended murder." His gaze was sharp, his tone final, and the child prevented it. The whispers surged again, but they were different now, less suspicion, more unease. Guests looked at Lucas with a mix of awe and discomfort, as though struggling to reconcile the ragged boy with the role of savior. Ethan's hand came down heavy but steady on Lucas's shoulder. It wasn't the grip of anger anymore, but the grounding weight of acknowledgement. Lucas stiffened, unused to any touch that wasn't rough or dismissive. Slowly, uncertainly, he lifted his eyes to Ethan's, and in that silence between them, something past a wordless understanding. For Ethan, the realization cut deep. All his training, all his discipline, all his instinct hadn't been enough to save him tonight. Instead, his life now belonged to a boy who shouldn't even have been here, a barefoot orphan who had chosen to speak when no one else could. For Lucas, it was the first time an adult had believed him, truly believed him. Dr. Caldwell cleared his throat, folding the handkerchief carefully into a small glass vial. "I'll send this for analysis, but my word is enough for now. Whoever attempted this knew what they were doing." Ethan's jaw tightened. His mind flicked back to the man in the black coat slipping through the archway. Cold eyes, calculated movements, gone before Ethan could act. He leaned down, his voice low enough only Lucas could hear. "You saw him, didn't you?" Lucas nodded quickly. "I did. I swear it. He had a little bottle. He dropped it in when no one was watching." Ethan's hand tightened gently on his shoulder. "You did good, kid, damn good." Lucas's chest swelled, though fear still lingered in his eyes. For once, though, he didn't feel invisible. The courtyard, however, was far from calm. The host barked orders for guards to check the grounds, though Ethan suspected the man in black was long gone. Guests gathered in nervous clusters, whispering, casting glances toward Ethan and Lucas. The poisoned glance lay in pieces, its glittering shards now a reminder that the night's elegance had shattered forever. Ethan straightened, drawing himself tall. His gaze swept the crowd. He wasn't looking for approval, but he knew they were watching. "This boy saved my life tonight," he said, his voice carrying like a command. "Don't you forget it." The murmurs faltered. No one dared argue. Lucas looked up at him again, almost disbelieving. Gratitude flickered in his eyes, fragile, like a flame that had never been sheltered from the wind. For Ethan, the weight of it all pressed down hard. He had walked into this night expecting nothing more than speeches, handshakes, maybe even a few false smiles. Instead, he had come face to face with death and with the truth that courage can come from the smallest, unlikeliest of places. And as the lanterns flickered above, their glow less golden now and more harsh against the shadows, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Someone had marked him. Someone wanted him dead. But thanks to Lucas, he was alive, and he intended to find out why. The chaos of the lantern-lit garden slowly ebbed into a heavy, uneasy quiet. Shattered glass still glittered underfoot, catching the light like fragments of fallen stars. Guests clustered in tense groups, voices lowered to anxious whispers. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the faint sound of police sirens began to wail in the distance, a delayed echo to the near tragedy that had nearly unfolded. And there, at the very edge of the garden, sat the one creature who had not moved through all of it, the German shepherd. The dog sat poised and still, a sentinel against the velvet dark. Its coat shimmered faintly beneath the glow of lanterns swaying in the night air, golden eyes fixed on the scene, sharp and unblinking, as though recording every detail for some eternal memory. It neither barked nor whined, only silence wrapped around it like an aura, a calm in the storm. People noticed. At first, just a few heads turned, half out of curiosity, half for comfort, but soon, whispers spread. "The dog hasn't moved once. Look at its eyes. It's watching everything." For the shaken guests, that silent gaze became something grounding. The shepherd seemed untouched by fear, untouched by doubt, carrying a quiet authority that none of the frantic men and women around could muster. It was as if the animal knew truths hidden to human eyes, as if it had always known. Ethan noticed, too. He had always been a man who measured trust carefully, a soldier who understood loyalty better than most. And in those amber eyes, he saw something achingly familiar. That dog's silence wasn't emptiness, it was a promise. Lucas, pressed close to Ethan's side, followed the man's gaze. For a child who had grown up invisible to the world, the dog's stillness was a revelation. Nobody had ever looked at him with such steady recognition. Yet here was this animal, silent and unjudging, as though affirming, "I saw what you saw. I know the truth." For a long stretch of minutes, the shepherd did not move. It didn't need to. Its presence alone became the anchor in that night. It broke in trust. The guest's fear found something wordless to cling to, and without meaning to. The dog became more than a shadow on the edge of a party. It became a witness. Later, people would retell the story in many ways. Some would swear the shepherd's eyes glowed like lanterns themselves, as if lit by something beyond nature. Others insisted the dog had growled low when the man in the black coat slipped into the night, as if calling out the guilty. And still others, after enough wine and enough years, claimed the dog had locked eyes with Ethan at the precise moment Lucas cried out, as though urging fate forward. The truth was simpler. The dog had only sat there, watching unblinking. Yet that image sank deeper than all the noise and panic that had filled the night. For Ethan, the shepherd became a silent companion to his own unsettled thoughts. He could not shake the truth the doctor had revealed. Someone had wanted him dead. He had spent his life on battlefields far from home, expecting danger at every corner, but never here, not at a lantern-lit celebration in his own city. And yet, here it was. He glanced down at Lucas, who was still clutching his sleeve, small hands trembling with the weight of what had almost been. Ethan had not yet found the words to thank the boy, to bridge the gulf between soldier and child. But when his eyes drifted back toward the shepherd, he felt a strange reassurance, almost as though the animal was holding the silence for him, until he could find the right words. The night stretched on. The police arrived, took statements, and carried away the poisoned remnants of the shattered glass. Questions were asked, answers were thin. The mysterious man in the black coat had melted into the city, leaving nothing but suspicion in its wake. But through it all, the shepherd remained. It sat at the garden's edge long after the lanterns burned lower, long after most guests led into the safety of their cars and carriages, a still figure, eyes steady, ears alert, silent as stone. When Ethan finally left the garden that night, Lucas walking hesitantly at his side, he looked back one last time. The shepherd had not moved. Its gaze was still fixed, unwavering, as though memorizing the shape of every person, every shadow, every trembling breath that had crossed the garden, and Ethan knew without understanding how that people would not forget this image. Not tomorrow, not in a year, not ever. The night would be remembered for its chaos, yes, for the scream of a child and the shattered glass. But more than that, it would be remembered for the silent witness, a lone German shepherd, sitting at the edge of the world, eyes steady as the truth itself. It would become a symbol, and symbols, Ethan knew, often carried more weight than facts. The party had thinned, though not in spirit. Guests lingered in uneasy clusters, voices hushed, eyes darting to the broken glass still glistening beneath the lantern light. What was once a celebration now pulsed with suspicion. Fear had a way of bending people, twisting their whispers into something darker. It started with a murmur. That boy, he threw the glass. Heads turned toward Lucas, who stood close to Ethan's side, barefoot and pale in the glow of the lanterns. His wide eyes scanned the crowd, confused, frightened. He's not even supposed to be here. A woman in a sequined gown muttered, folding her arms, a street urchin in a party like this. How convenient that he appeared right before the chaos. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Another man, red-faced from too much whiskey, added his fuel could have been staged. Maybe the boy's working with whoever tried this. Distract us, smash the glass, make himself look like a hero while his accomplice slips away. Lucas stiffened. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. It was the old wound reopening. The memory of every time adults had waved him off, told him he didn't belong, dismissed his truth before he could give it voice. He glanced at Ethan, silently begging for someone, anyone, to believe him. Ethan Cole stepped forward. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded men under fire. That boy saved my life. The garden fell quiet, the edge in his tone cutting through the murmur. He shouted before I lifted the glass. He risked himself when none of you moved. Whatever doubts you're chewing on, chew on that. A few guests looked away, embarrassed. But suspicion does not yield so easily, and how do we know, Mr. Cole? The woman in sequins pressed. How do we know this isn't some elaborate act? A soldier returning home makes enemies, doesn't he? Ethan's jaw tightened. He had expected questions, even accusations, but hearing them aimed at a child scraped something raw in him. He lowered his voice, slow and deliberate. Because I know what fear looks like. I've seen it on battlefields, in foxholes, in the eyes of men who've lived through more than they should. That boy wasn't acting. He was terrified, and he acted anyway. Lucas stared at Ethan, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. For the first time that night, he didn't feel entirely invisible. But even as Ethan defended him, a storm churned in his own chest. Who wanted me dead? The question would not leave. He replayed the moment in his mind, the glass raised, the child's scream, the shattering of crystal, the doctor's grave words about poison. Someone in this very crowd, or someone who had slipped away unseen, had calculated his death with chilling precision. The thought pressed on him harder than the humid New Orleans night. Ethan scanned the garden. Every face seemed a possibility. The banker who shook his hand too firmly, the politician who praised his service with hollow words, even the servants, moving quickly to clear the mess. It seemed suspicious in the haze of paranoia. The man in the black coat haunted him most of all. Had anyone else truly seen him, or had the figure vanished like smoke before the crowd could confirm? Lucas tugged lightly at Ethan's sleeve. His small voice barely rose above the murmurs. I saw him, the man who did it. He was wearing black. He put something in your drink. Ethan knelt slightly, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. I believe you, he said. Steady, don't let their words make you doubt yourself. But in the soldier's chest, belief and doubt were two wolves locked in combat. He wanted to believe fully, to shut the door on suspicion. Yet years of service had carved something into him. Trust was fragile, and deception often wore innocent faces. The crowd, restless and divided, began drifting toward the gates. Some whispered their farewells, others left without a word, unwilling to linger in a place tainted by attempted murder. By the time the last carriage wheels faded into the night, only a handful remained: Ethan, Lucas, the host, still trembling with apologies, and the silent German shepherd, ever watchful from the garden's edge. Ethan straightened, hailing slowly. He had survived war zones, he had survived loss. But tonight, survival carried a different weight because it came wrapped in the cry of a child who should have been overlooked, forgotten, cast aside, and yet, without him, Ethan would already be cold in the ground. He glanced down at Lucas again. The boy's bare feet were dirty, his shirt worn thin. He didn't belong in glittering ballrooms. yet he had become the single most important figure of the night. Ethan's gratitude was fierce, undeniable, but beneath it ran the gnawing question, "Shop his broken glass. Who put the poison in my glass?" That question would not leave him. It settled into his bones, heavy as the Louisiana night, whispering with every breath, for if one attempt had been made, another would surely follow. And so, while others saw only a child out of place and a party ruined, Ethan Cole saw something else. The beginning of a hunt, because somewhere in the city of New Orleans, under the same lantern-lit sky, walked a man who wanted him gone, and Ethan had no intention of waiting quietly for the next glass to be raised. The city had quieted by the time Ethan and Lucas stepped out of the mansion's iron gates. New Orleans at midnight carried its own music, distant brass drifting from a jazz club, the steady clip of hooves on cobblestones, and the hum of a world that never quite slept. Yet for Ethan, the night wasn't peaceful. It was a shroud. Somewhere out there, in the velvet dark, walked a man who had tried to take his life. The host had begged him to stay, to wait for the authorities, but Ethan had learned long ago that waiting only gave shadows more room to move. Tonight, his instincts screamed that action had to be immediate. Lucas walked beside him, small and hesitant, his bare feet padding against the stone. Every so often, you would glance up at Ethan, as if to make sure the soldier hadn't changed his mind about bringing him along. Ethan noticed, and though he said nothing at first, his silence carried its own weight. Finally, Ethan broke it. "You said you saw his face, the man in the coat. Tell me what you remember." Lucas hesitated, drawing in a shaky breath. He was tall, not like you, but close. His eyes, they were sharp, like he was always watching. Dark hair, and a scar, right here. The boy touched his cheek, tracing a thin line from the corner of his eye down toward his jaw. Ethan nodded slowly. "A scar that was something that could narrow the field. And you're sure you saw him put something in the glass?" "I swear it," Lucas whispered, his voice cracked with the weight of being believed, or perhaps with the fear that this time his words might slip away like so many times before. Ethan stopped walking. He crouched so his eyes were level with the boy's. "Listen to me. Tonight, you're not invisible. You're the only one who saw the truth. That makes you important, too important for me to ignore. Do you understand?" Lucas blinked at him, the lantern light from a nearby street post catching the wetness in his eyes. He nodded. Together, they turned down Royal Street, where gas lamps burned low and most windows were shuttered for the night. Ethan's mind was already working in grids, the way it had in combat zones, entry points, escape routes, lines of sight. The man in the coat had to know this city, had to have vanished into its labyrinth before anyone could raise alarm. That suggested planning. It suggested intent. As they passed a narrow alley, Lucas tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Wait." Ethan followed his gaze. In the dirt near the edge of the lamplight lay something small, glinting faintly. He knelt, brushing his fingers over it, a cufflink silver, engraved with an unfamiliar crest, not the kind a street thief would drop, but the kind a man in a tailored coat might wear. "Good eyes," Ethan murmured, pocketing the find. Lucas straightened a little at the praise, though he said nothing. The search carried them deeper into the quarter, where balconies draped with ironwork loomed overhead and the air smelled of spilled liquor and damp stone. They stopped at a corner where an old dog barked lazily from behind a gate, its growl low as though it had sensed something unusual earlier. Ethan studied the ground. Scuff marks, fresh marks by the look of them. A hurried step dragging against stone, the trail bent toward the river. "He went this way," Ethan said. Lucas frowned. "How can you tell?" "Because a man running doesn't think about how he lands his feet. He thinks about what's behind him." Ethan pointed to the uneven prints. "He was in a rush." The boys stared wide-eyed, as if the soldier's instincts were some kind of magic. The trail led them to the levee, where moonlight turned the Mississippi into a black ribbon of glass. Barges drifted slowly by, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies, and there, half buried near the pier, Ethan spotted another trace, ashes from a hurriedly extinguished cigarette. Still warm. Ethan's jaw tightened. They had been close, so close. Lucas crouched beside the ashes, whispering as though afraid the night itself might listen. "Do you think he knows we're looking for him?" "Oh, he knows," Ethan said. His voice carried the certainty of a man who had hunted before. "The question is whether he's looking back at us right now." Lucas shivered. Ethan scanned the dark water, the silent warehouses, the shadows that could hide a dozen men. His hand twitched instinctively toward his side, where a weapon used to rest. But tonight, he carried nothing but his wits and the trust of a boy who had no one else. He exhaled slowly. "We'll find him, but not tonight." Lucas looked up at him, confused. Why stop now? Because chasing a ghost in the dark gets you killed. Tomorrow, we move in daylight, with eyes open and ground in our favor, whoever this man is. He slipped once, he'll slip again. The boy nodded reluctantly. For all his eagerness, fatigue was written on his small frame. The night had stretched him beyond his years. Ethan saw it, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his bare toes curled against the cold stone. Come on, Ethan said gently. You need a roof over your head tonight. Lucas hesitated, torn between pride and gratitude, then finally walked alongside him without protest. As they moved away from the river, Ethan felt the cufflink heavy in his pocket, a tiny piece of silver, a single thread in a larger tapestry. But threads had a way of leading back to their weavers. In the silence, Ethan's thoughts returned to the truth he couldn't shake. Someone wanted him dead, a faceless figure in a coat, a scar carved across his cheek. And now, beside him, walked a boy who held the only clear picture of that face, which meant Lucas was more than a witness. He was a target, and Ethan Cole's soldier-turned-survivor, silently vowed whoever came for the boy would have to go through him first. The morning broke heavy and humid, as though the city itself carried the weight of what had transpired the night before. Ethan sat by the window of a small boarding house on the edge of the quarter, a mug of bitter coffee cooling in his hand. Lucas still slept on the cot nearby, curled beneath a blanket too big for him, his chest rising and falling with the deep breaths of exhaustion. Ethan's eyes, however, did not close. Sleep had eluded him. The night had been too full of ghosts, some old, some freshly born. He could still feel the phantom chill of the glass in his hand, the echo of a boy's cry slicing through the night. But more than anything, he felt the tug of memory, drawing him backward into a chapter of his life he had tried to leave sealed. There had been a time, years ago, in a war-torn corner of the world, where the maps were a little more than guesswork and the lines of loyalty blurred daily. His unit had intercepted shipments that didn't belong to any official legicretes marked as medical supplies, but heavy with weapons and uncut diamonds. Ethan had been one of the few who saw the contents before they disappeared into the hands of men whose names were never spoken aloud. He hadn't understood then, not fully, but whispers among the ranks filled in the blanks. A network, a syndicate that reached far beyond the battlefield, stretching into cities and boardrooms. Men who thrived on chaos and turned blood into profit. Ethan hadn't pursued it. His orders were to move, to fight, to survive. And so he buried what he knew. Now, years later, in a garden lit by Antons, someone had tried to silence him. Not for what he had done, but for what he had seen. Ethan rubbed his temples, the truth pressing hard against his skull. They think I still know something. Or worse, that I could talk. Behind him, Lucas stirred, mumbling in his sleep before sitting up abruptly. His hair stuck out in every direction, his eyes foggy but alert. Where are we? He asked, voice raspy. A place to catch our breath, Ethan replied. He didn't tell the boy how thin the walls were, how easily a determined man could find them here. Lucas rubbed his eyes. You think they'll come after you again? Ethan hesitated, then gave the answer the boy deserved. Yes, and not just me. You saw his face. That makes you dangerous to them too. The words hit Lucas like a stone. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, his jaw trembling though he tried to steady it. Then what do? We don't wait, Ethan said. We move first. But even as he spoke, he knew the scale of what they were up against. This wasn't just a lone assassin or a vendetta born of personal grudge. It was something larger, colder, organized, a machine that didn't forgive loose ends. Later that day, Ethan walked the streets with Lucas close at his side. He noticed it quickly, the shadows that lingered too long, the way conversations hushed as they passed. Lucas noticed too, though he didn't have the soldier's vocabulary for it. They're watching us, aren't they? He whispered. Ethan's hand brushed the boy's shoulder. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. But yes, they're watching. By dusk, the truth had become undeniable. At a corner cafe, Ethan caught sight of a man pretending to read a newspaper but never turning a page. At the docks, another leaned on a crate, his eyes following them through the crowd. Each one blended easily with the city's rhythm, but together, they painted a clear picture. Surveillance. Lucas clenched his fists. Why me? I'm just a kid. Ethan crouched low, gripping his shoulders firmly. Because you saw what no one else did, and sometimes, the smallest witness is the loudest threat. The boy swallowed hard, but there was steel in his gaze now. Then we don't let them win. Ethan almost smiled. The kid had more grit than most grown men he'd served beside. That night, in the cramped room of the boarding house, Ethan spread out what little evidence they had. The silver cufflink, the memory of the scarred face, the knowledge of what the syndicate had once hidden. Lucas leaned close, tracing the crest engraved on the cufflink with a curious finger. "What's this mean?" Ethan shook his head. "Not sure yet, but it's not military. Too ornate. Could be a family symbol or a society's." He paused, the word heavy on his tongue. "An organization?" Lucas looked at him, eyes wide. "You mean like a gang?" "Bigger than that," Ethan said. "The kind of people who can cross oceans without passports, who can be in a ballroom one night and a battlefield the next." Silence stretched between them. Then Ethan added, more to himself than to the boy, "And they don't forget the men who've seen too much." Outside floorboard creaked in the hallway. Ethan's hand went to the knife he kept near the bed frame. Body tense, but the sound faded, replaced by the muffled steps of someone simply passing by. Still, his pulse didn't slow. He looked back at Lucas, who stared at him with unspoken questions. Ethan answered the only one that mattered. "Whatever storm is coming, you're in it now, but you're not alone. You've got me." Lucas nodded, small but resolute. For a boy who had spent much of his life invisible, the words meant more than he could say. As the lantern outside flickered against the shutters, Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving the window. The conspiracy that had once been a half-remembered shadow from his past now loomed at his doorstep, and somewhere in the city, men with scars and silver cufflinks were deciding how best to erase the last two witnesses to this secret. Ethan Cole knew only one thing for certain. He would not let them. Not the boy. Not himself. Not tonight. The night had fallen heavy over the town square, the lanterns swaying in the crisp autumn breeze. The remnants of the harvest festival still lingered. Discarded ribbons trampled underfoot, stalls half emptied, and the echoes of laughter that had long since been replaced with whispers of fear. What had once been a gathering of joy was now a hunting ground for shadows. Ethan Granger stood close to Lucas, his body angled in that protective way soldiers never truly forgot. His eyes, sharp and weary, scanned the crowd. Somewhere out there, among the blur of faces and shifting lantern light, the man in the black coat still roamed free. Ethan's chest tightened with the memory of the poisoned glass, the chaos under the lanterns, and the unmistakable truth that someone had wanted him dead. Lucas clutched the sleeve of Ethan's jacket, his eyes wide, darting from figure to figure. For days, his memory of the man's face had burned into him like fire. Every detail, the sharp cheekbones, the cold eyes, the way he moved with calculated intent was carved into the boy's mind. And now, in the swirl of strangers, Lucas caught a glimpse. "There," he whispered, his voice trembling, but sure. "He's here." Ethan's gaze followed the boy's trembling finger. Across the lantern-lit square, a tall figure stood, half hidden in the shifting shadows. His black coat seemed to drink in the light, and his eyes flicked restlessly, scanning for threats, for exits. Ethan's instincts roared to life. He moved subtly, circling, his every motion careful. The last thing he wanted was to spook the man before they had proof, but before he could close in, before he could maneuver with a soldier's patience. Something unexpected happened. Lucas broke free. The boy surged forward, his voice cracking but strong enough to pierce the noise of the crowd. "It's him," Lucas shouted, his finger stabbing the air like a blade. "He's the one. He put the poison in the drink." The words cut through the night like a siren. Conversations died mid-sentence. The shuffling of feet froze. Heads snapped around, eyes narrowing, widening, locking onto the figure in the coat. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by the murmur of voices rising in shock and recognition. The man stiffened, his cover shattered in an instant. His eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits of fury. The predator had been dragged into the open by a child's voice, and for the first time his composure broke. He bolted, chairs toppled, lanterns swung wildly as the crowd scattered. Screams followed his path as he shoved through, desperate to escape. But he had underestimated the terrain. He had underestimated the boy. And worst of all, he had underestimated Ethan Granger. "Lucas, stay back," Ethan barked, his boots already pounding against the cobblestones. The years seemed to peel away as his training surged forward. His body remembered the rhythm of pursuit, the calculation of angles, the reading of momentum. He cut through the panicked mass with precision, his focus locked onto the fleeing shadow ahead. The man in black lunged for the alley, but Ethan was faster. With a burst of speed that defied his age, he reached out, his hand clamping down on the man's arm with iron strength. The stranger twisted, desperate, a knife flashing in the dim lantern light. But Ethan was ready. He slammed the man hard against the stone wall, the knife clattering uselessly to the ground. With one swift movement, Ethan wrenched his arm behind his back, locking him in place. The crowd had gathered again. Emboldened by Ethan's strength, murmurs rose to shouts, anger, relief. The collective voice of people who realized they were staring at the very man who had tried to poison one of their own. Lucas stood at the front, chest heaving, his small frame trembling, but his eyes never left the man pinned against the wall. His courage had forced the truth into daylight, and though fear still coursed through him, it was matched by a new and unshakable resolve. The man hissed through clenched teeth. "You don't know what you've started." Ethan pressed harder, his voice low but deadly calm. "You tried to kill me in the shadows. Now you'll answer for it in the light." The sheriff arrived moments later, men at his side, ropes ready. The black-coated man struggled, but the fight had already drained from him. Ethan shoved him toward the lawman, his grip steady until the last possible moment. As they dragged the prisoner away, the crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, and cries of relief filled the square. Echoing beneath the lanterns that had once witnessed chaos but now bore witness to justice, people reached for Lucas, patting his shoulders, thanking their words tumbling over one another. "You saved him. You saved us all. Brave boy." Lucas flushed, overwhelmed, but he didn't shrink away. He stood tall, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. For the first time, the weight of his voice felt like more than just sound, it felt like power. Ethan rested a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. His eyes softened, pride tempered by the knowledge of the danger that still lingered. For tonight, they had won, but the war with the darkness was not over. As the last lanterns flickered and the prisoner's shouts faded into the night, Ethan looked at Lucas with quiet certainty. "You were right to speak," he said. "Sometimes words are sharper than any blade." Lucas nodded, though he still trembled, yet faced the darkness and named it aloud. And in that moment, he had turned the tide. The night air seemed lighter as they walked away, the crowd parting respectfully around them. The battle was far from finished, but for the first time in days, hope burned bright beneath the lanterns. The first light of morning broke over the horizon, casting long fingers of gold across the quiet town. After nights steeped in fear, suspicion, and chaos, the day seemed almost unreal in its gentleness. The festival square, so recently a place of uproar, now lay bathed in the soft glow of dawn, its lanterns extinguished, its cobblestones glistening with dew. For the first time in days, the town breathed easily. The black-coated man had been taken away under heavy guard, his furious protests silenced by chains and the unwavering eyes of those who had once cowered in his presence. From him came a thread that unraveled everything: named, hidden passages, safe houses, and contacts. Piece by piece, the shadowy network that had haunted Ethan's steps began to collapse. Lawmen moved swiftly, raiding dens that had festered unseen for years, dragging criminals into the light of justice. The organization that once thrived in secrecy crumbled in the span of a single night. Ethan Granger stood at the edge of it all, his weathered face etched with exhaustion but lifted by relief. Poison had not claimed him. The conspiracies whispered against him had withered. The weight of doubt that had lingered in some hearts was gone. His honor, tarnished by suspicion and the shadows of his past, was restored with a clarity that felt almost holy. Yet even with vindication, Ethan's thoughts turned again and again to the boy who had stood beside him through the storm. Lucas, the boy who once trailed behind, unnoticed, too quiet to command attention, had risen in a single moment of courage. His voice had pierced the veil of lies, pointing unflinchingly at the darkness when grown men faltered. Now, in the morning light, townsfolk gathered around him, not with suspicion or ridicule, but with admiration. "Brave lad," someone said, clapping him gently on the back. "Wouldn't be standing here if not for you." Another added. Children who once ignored him now followed with wide eyes, whispering his name as though it belonged to a hero from legend. Lucas flushed at the attention, tugging at the hem of his shirt, uncertain how to carry the weight of sudden recognition. But Ethan saw the change within him, subtle yet undeniable. The boy was no longer invisible. He was a symbol now, a reminder that courage could rise from the smallest, quietest of places. As the town stirred awake, Ethan walked with Lucas to the edge of the square. There, beneath an ancient oak tree, the German shepherd sat in its usual silence. The dog had been present through every twist of the ordeal, eyes watchful, posture unwavering. While chaos had surged and men had shouted, the animal had remained steady, like a sentinel carved from living stone. Lucas knelt by the dog, resting his hand gently against its fur. The shepherd blinked slowly, then leaned into the touch, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forged in fire and fear for the boy. The silent creature was more than a dog, it was a witness, a companion, and perhaps the only soul who had seen him fully before the rest of the world did. Ethan watched them, his chest tightening with something he could not name. Gratitude, pride, a measure of peace he hadn't felt in years. He lowered himself to sit against the tree's trunk, the morning sun warming his shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to simply be. The sheriff approached, tipping his hat. "It's over, Ethan. With what we pulled from that man and his ilk, their grip on this town is finished. You're free of their shadow." Ethan nodded slowly. "Free, maybe, but shadows don't die easy. There'll always be someone chasing power through fear." His eyes shifted to Lucas. "What matters is having the courage to stand against it, even if your voice shakes." Lucas looked up at him, words poised on his lips but caught in his throat. The boy didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was answer enough. The crowd began to disperse, life returning to normal. Merchants reopened their stalls, children ran laughing through the square, and lanterns were taken down one by one. The nightmare had passed, yet its memory lingered, a scar, but also a lesson. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan rose and placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "You did more than anyone asked of you, son. You proved something most men forget. No voice is too small if it speaks for what's right." Lucas's eyes brightened, tears threatening but held back by the swell of pride. For the first time, he felt as though the world truly saw him not as a burden, not as background, but as someone who mattered. The shepherd barked once, a deep and resonant sound, breaking the solemn moment with a touch of life. Ethan chuckled softly, patting the dog's head. "Even he agrees." Together, the three of them, soldier, boy, and dog, stood beneath the oak as the town carried on, the light of dawn bathing them in quiet triumph. The night had tried to silence them, poison had threatened to steal breath, shadows had sought to erase truth, and fear had tried to keep voices locked inside trembling chests. But the night had failed, because one boy, once invisible, had chosen to speak, and in his voice a community rediscovered its courage, its unity, and its hope. As the morning unfolded into day, Ethan knew the battle would never truly be over, but he also knew this: no matter how dark the night became, it would never drown out the smallest light or the smallest voice when it rose to defend what was right. For in the end there was a truth more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any shadow. No voice is too small if it protects what is just.